continue directly our reading from Mark's Gospel. This will be the first healing act of Jesus in the Gospel. They went to Capernaum, and when Sabbath came, Jesus entered the synagogue and taught. They were astounded at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority, and not as the scribes. Just then there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit. He cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? If you come to destroy us, I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent, come out of him." The unclean spirit convulsed him and cried with a loud voice and came out of him. And they were all amazed, and they kept on asking one another, "What is this? A new teaching with authority or power." He commanded even the unclean spirits, and they obeyed him. At once his fame began to spread throughout the surrounding region of Galilee. Reading ends here. I'm going to emphasize almost entirely the reading from 1 Corinthians this morning, where Paul struggles with judging others as being proper or improper, and also how do we make ethical decisions that build up a church community and don't threaten it. We worked on this passage just this Thursday in our clergy group here. And two things came to mind there. One, I've mentioned this before, in a public opinion survey of people under 35, 94% of those surveyed said that they saw the church as judgmental. And they meant it in a negative sense. Also, judging others is one of those areas where we know the words in church, "I'm not to judge. It's not for me to judge. I'm not to be judgmental." But we don't give nearly enough help on how to do it and how difficult it may well be to try to achieve it. Here in 1 Corinthians, as you've already seen, Paul is dealing with a church that seems capable of fighting about almost anything on the grounds that they were now Christian. They were free to do anything they pleased. In other words, they were a typical congregation. Whether we're in church or out of it, however, all of us know the feeling of being in the crosshairs of someone else criticizing and judging us. And more likely than not, all of us have been in the situation of criticizing or judging another. In particular, just think of in-laws, and it will become abundantly clear. An offshoot of the word judging has a sense of scrutinizing, poking around inside, making a determination, usually about somebody else. Christians claim, however, that the Spirit of God gives us insight, especially about spiritual matters. And with our special insight, we examine the world with a different set of eyes. We would claim a clearer set of eyes. But both Paul and Jesus would say this: we scarcely understand ourselves. We, all of us, look through the world with egotistical eyes at the same way, that tend to build us up and knock other people down. How can we claim to know the way of God when we can scarcely put one foot in front of the other? Or as we read recently in Jonah, we don't know our left hand from our right. It's hard for us to grasp the extent of the issue of where and what you ate in the ancient world. Let's, for this morning, just see it as a hot button issue where people took sides, yes or no, this is ethical, this is unethical, this is right, this is wrong, especially for somebody else. We all share a tendency to take matters of principle out of what seems to be fairly trivial matters from the outside. This issue of food was and is an important marker, though, when people make ethical decisions. In our time, many of us have suffered through a Thanksgiving meal where a recently converted vegan starts preaching at us about how we're all lesser moral beings because we eat fish or meat. Jim Sinclair reminded me this morning of a very funny piece in the paper about an argument between a vegan and a vegetarian. Some people say it is the only ethical thing to make slow food as opposed to fast food. Now there's a locavore movement that we should only eat locally grown foods or foods organically produced, even though they cost 3 times more than regular food, and we have no idea what organically produced means. There are people running around saying we can't eat food with chemical additives. For goodness sake, we have a measles outbreak in this country because people are afraid of giving a vaccine. After 300 years of knowing that it can not only control but eradicate disease. What Paul is talking about here, and we continue to argue about whenever we talk about ethics, is this permissible or not? Is it proper or not? It's really a boundary issue. Is this within Christian ethics, or have we moved outside of it? It's an announcement. Are you in the in-group or the out-group? But more to the point, Paul is asking, how do we deal with our boundaries? When do we relax them? When do we get strict about them? When is it a matter of mere personal preference? When should it be seen as a matter of principle? Just recently, in the St. Louis paper, on the front page is an article about the Bonham Presbyterian Church across the river that's made a decision to leave the denomination. And now the struggle is basically over, are they going to have to pay a fine, or will they control their property, or will their property be taken from them, quote unquote, by the presbytery, remembering that all churches hold property in trust for the larger regional church. Paul stipulates that those who said they had liberty to eat meat at a pagan temple service are correct, right. They have what we would call an elevated consciousness or awareness. They are in the right, Paul would say. But does that give them permission to do what they want if it endangers someone else's less elevated religious or ethical point of view? Paul says that not only do we make decisions about right and wrong, proper or improper, ethical or unethical, on our own compass, that we need to be concerned about the formation and maintenance of others in the Christian community. Paul's interested in this. We need to take into account, does this build up the community? Does it make it more cohesive? Does it hold us together? Or does it threaten to splinter? Does this threaten in fact, to tear us apart. Then and now, people were more concerned about exiting, making protest resignations, withholding time, effort, or money, or spinning off a new group than they were trying to hold together in the very group that offers them the very ground of salvation. Paul agrees that all Christians have knowledge, all Christians have wisdom, not just the in-group, but those with a higher, deeper, stronger understanding are to make allowances for those who may not be at their level. If understanding more deeply, more fully makes us arrogant, we should back off. What Paul's interested in is this: love upbuilds the person and the community. Arrogance threatens to tear it apart. Looking down on other people when we disagree tears apart the fiber of a church. No. Love builds up. It doesn't puff up, no matter who we are. We are being told here not to be religiously correct, supercilious toward those whom we disagree, even when we know we're right, Paul says. Put differently, can we ever look down on anyone if we gaze at them through the eyes of love? For it presumes an equality made in the image and likeness of God. In other words, Paul says we should bend over backwards to take someone's weakness, not their strength, their weakness into account when we're making an ethical decision. And we are not to judge them harshly, but to offer a hand, perhaps to lift them up continually toward a new and growing sense of the faith. In other words, forego our rights and our privilege for the sake of the other. That's exactly the opposite of how we're trained to look at our lives as Americans. For Americans, if we say, well, it's my right, that stops the discussion. For an American, we say it's my choice. That stops the discussion. Paul says no, for Christians that begins the discussion, not close it off. And I agree, there's so many dangers here. If we fail to assert a right, does that make us too passive? Does this threaten to make Christians a doormat? Does this threaten to give a veto, again in politically correct thought or language, just because someone's offended, just because someone's preferences are not being met? But Paul insists that we are more than individuals. We are part of the family, the household, the church of God. All of us are connected. All of us in the same boat. Paul uses family language to try and get at the very idea of basic equality and respect. Bruce Springsteen saying, we take care of our own. We don't judge them. We don't exclude them. We take care of our own. So Paul says, if he's not going to eat meat, period, okay. If it saves even one person from the threat of religious destruction, if it causes one person to stumble and fall, that's enough for Paul to back off. He's willing to forego his personal liberty. He wants to accommodate the perceived needs of others, even if they are lesser knowing. They're more easily swayed. They're more easily scandalized than he is. So often, we look at ethical issues and say, my way or the highway. You're less than me if you disagree with me on this issue. If I don't get my way, I'm leaving. Instead, Paul asks us every single day to ask, is this upbuilding my community? Is this helping us to hold together? Am I taking into account the different needs and values of folks? No easy answer, but the daily application of spiritual wisdom to the situation that presents itself to us is the Christian calling. No more, no less.